The following is a presentation of Tuning into Sci-Fi TV, the viewer's guide to genre television.
Everyone, welcome to another bonus podcast for Game of Thrones Season 5. I'm Wendy Hembrock, and I'm joined again by our small council. Let's go around the table and introduce yourselves, please.
This is Christine from Michigan, the Mistress of Correction and Consistency.
This is Jesse Jackson from Dallas, Texas, the Master of Happy Good Times.
And this is Lou from Alberta, Canada, the Master of Rainbows, and we're so happy to add the United States to the Canadian rainbow.
Woohoo!
Woohoo! This is Shannon from Vancouver, Washington, and currently I am the Master of Decrepitude.
Happy birthday, Shannon.
Yes!
Is that what that means?
Yeah, I think that's a veiled implication. We're all toasting you with a big flagon of whatever your favorite beverage is.
We just need George R. R. Martin to describe it for 100 pages.
Yes. And lemon cake shall be served. I am Wendy. I am the Mistress of Moderation. And you might be wondering, why is there a bonus show for Game of Thrones Season 5 when the season is over? But the small council's work is never done, and we have more things to discuss. So we're going to first talk about some of the listener submissions we got to the small council and discuss those. We're also going to talk about a couple of links and other fun goodies for today. So first, I want to point out a couple of links that folks might want to ponder over. One is an interview with Cerise Van Houten, I think is how her name is pronounced, who plays Melisandre. And there's also a funny article with the showrunners talking about their hoped-for legacy of Game of Thrones.
I have not had a chance to look at these two. I was too busy doing other homework, but you caught my attention with funny. I'm definitely going to read the showrunners article.
Yes, I read the interview with Melisandre, but I did not do the legacy yet. I, like everyone else, was doing our other homework that our Mistress of Moderation and our podcast queen assigned us.
Guilty.
The EW piece with the showrunners is kind of funny because the thing that they jokingly compare it to as far as the legacy is Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
That's greatness.
Yeah, I had very high expectations for what they were going to say, and then they said that, which I thought was a very nice shout out to their cast and what a strong cast that they have, and the expectation that, looking back on the careers of many actors, that all can point back to Fast Times at Ridgemont High as the place where they sort of got one of their big breaks, that they want Game of Thrones to be that for someone too. So I think the caliber of show is a little bit different than Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but it's a goal to shoot for, I guess.
Wait. Do I have to watch that movie to understand the article? Because I haven't seen that movie.
All you have to do is go to the IMDb page for Fast Times at Ridgemont High and see all the actors that came from it.
Whew, thank God.
It's actually a pretty funny movie, but I don't know how well it ages. Probably not that well. Really?
It was written by Cameron Crowe based on his time for Rolling Stone going undercover as an older person as a high school student. So it was very much the teen movie of its era. And like we said, just a all-star cast. I mean, tons of people that you would recognize now went on to be big stars from that. And as much as he may be kind of an ass right now, Sean Penn is fantastic in that.
Shannon, if I ever need to go on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you are going to be my phone a friend. Just so you know.
Also handy at trivia nights.
Oh, excellent to know. So now let's move on to the main discussion for today, which is the listener submissions that we got to the small council. So we're going to start going through some of them. And we appreciate everyone's participation. We got some very good comments and questions from folks. The first one we're going to talk about comes from Carl Brand, who is my Vogue on Poetry on Twitter.
I've been listening to and getting great genre ideas for years by listening to Kevin, Wendy, and Brent. I love the spin-off podcasts, especially the Small Council assembled for Game of Thrones. My theory for the Small Council is this. Since they started the season with a flashback that had never been done before, that was so specific and predicted Cersei's kids will die, I think it's time for Marcella and Tommen to die in the show. I think sparrows and sand snakes might be the cause of their demise by the end of the year.
So I've heard a few people bring up the prophecy that was given to us at the beginning of the season, and a lot of people have said that means all of her children are going to be dead by the end of the season. Well, the line really goes, gold will be their crowns, gold will be their shrouds. There's no timetable in the prophecy. And it's a lot of poetic phrasing because, well, Marcella never wore a crown, so, but she did die. And the show doesn't actually use shrouds. They always just put stones on their eyes. So as with all sorts of fortune telling and prophecy, it's all in the interpretation. And obviously Tommen didn't die this season, and we don't know if he'll die next season. All I can tell you is that everyone will die. Valar Morghulis. So I don't know what any of that prophecy means. Honestly, it was kind of like saying, guess what? I've got a great prediction for you. Tomorrow you're going to get up, you're going to do a bunch of stuff, you're going to go back to sleep.
You know, first off, I wanted to say great Twitter handle, Carl. Very clever and a lot of fun. You got it half right. Unless they do a twist, Marcella is dead. And I think Tommen may have died of exhaustion by over honeymooning himself if his wife had not gotten put in the dungeon. So interesting theories. And like I said, you did better than my prediction. So good job.
Mm-hmm. I like what he wrote here as well, but I just take it as more of a pragmatic. It was just a stylistic choice that they wanted to sort of throw us off balance with the start of the season. I don't know if the sparrows and the sand snakes are going to be involved in that next season, but that would be interesting for sure.
I think there were some thematic reasons to use that as a bookend, because it starts with a flashback and a prophecy for Cersei, and it ends, not the very last scene, but it's, Cersei's walk of shame and then wrapping up kind of that storyline. So it kind of bookended the season, and a lot of dynamics that were put in play, specifically in King's Landing, played off of that, because it shows that Cersei was paranoid about this, from being a very young girl. And the two components that made it into the show, there's a third from the books that didn't. The first is about somebody younger and more beautiful to cast you down and take all that you had dear, which the show, the book, and the character obviously interprets to be Marjorie. And so that's why she goes to a lot of trouble to try and bring the High Sparrow in, and unleashes that, which backfires against her dramatically. But a lot of that is to punish Marjorie and the Tyrells. But if you take a step back, like Christine was saying, prophecies are wide open to interpretation. Could it be Dany? Could it be, and are we to do we have gender bias here? I mean, could it be Jon Snow? Could it be a guy who is younger and more beautiful than Cersei? We don't know. I mean, but I guess the point is that it kind of fueled her paranoia that she already had as a character trait. And I think it was a good thing to put in the beginning. And the casting, as with everything, has been spot on. And the second part was about the three kids. Gold shall be their crowns and gold their shrouds, which, as Christine noted, the daughter, Marcella, was never crowned. I mean, she was a princess, so could you say she wore a crown? Could she be crowned an heir? There's only 2 of her 3 children have already been a king. So, again, it's all up to interpretation. And then the last was a thing about a Valonqur, Valonqar, and this is from the books, shall wrap his hands around your pale white throat and choke the life of you. And for some reason, they did not put that final component of Maggie the Frog's prophecy into the show. But a lot of book interpretations read that as being Tyrion, and that prophecy also fueled a lot of her hatred of Tyrion. So very interesting. And, 2 of her children are already dead. And the gist of it is that Cersei would outlive her children, and thus far, 2 down, 1 to go.
So apparently Valonqar is High Valyrian for little brother, which would why it would be Tyrion.
Correct. And it's also, I've seen like high and low Valyrian interpretations, and it could be one of those things that's figurative, like, hey, bro, that it's not necessarily literally genealogical brother. And then there's also, there have been questions raised about Tyrion's parentage too. So could it be that Jaime was born like a minute after, even though they're twins, so he could technically be a little brother? And could he be the one that's responsible? Again, prophecy, what you going to do?
I agree that prophecy, the signs are cloudy, right? When you read the crystal ball. But part of it, I think, was to actually take a jab at Cersei's certainty and arrogance about what she thought was going to be her life. And I'm not quite so literal about the interpretation about gold will be their crowns and their shrouds, because gold is also just symbolic of the Lannisters. That's the thing that they have all over or they used to have in Casterly Rock. So to me, I still think the prophecy's 2/3 right. Because 2 of them did get a crown and 2 of them are dead. I'm assuming there isn't some thing that happens to Marcella, that maybe, she lands a crown when she's in her burial state or something. But the one that I find more interesting is the one you mentioned about who is the younger and more beautiful one that will be her failure, will cause her failure. Because Cersei thinks it's Marjorie, but I agree who it really is, I don't think is going to be Marjorie. I'm still liking Sansa's odds on this one somehow. I mean, the story seems to be going down a long path for trial. So at first I was thinking, well, there's no way Sansa's even going to get back near King's Landing anytime soon. But now I'm starting to wonder if she will, or if it'll be Dany. I do like the idea that it's Tyrion, though, but that reference didn't sound familiar from the show. Maybe it'll come in later or something. So those were great questions. And then the other comment he had was about talking about a time when this was not in the voicemail. This was in a follow-up email that I got from Carl, talking about trying to think about another time when a book and a movie or a follow-on television show were sort of racing to the finish line together. He was thinking about Harry Potter, because I think J.K. Rowling did slow down a little bit in the last couple books, but she definitely finished well ahead of the final movies coming out. And I'm wondering if you guys have thought about this even more broadly, about how this sort of changes the dynamics between book readers and non-book readers, because up to this point, book readers have always had sort of a stick to beat the show with. about. It's not that way in the books. Now, canon is sort of wide open.
I think the closest situation to a show racing the books would be what actually frequently happens with Japanese anime. They're usually based off of a manga, but I don't know how they make these two forms of entertainment, but it always seems like the manga's out for a very short period of time, and then they start making it into a show, and then the show catches up with the manga, and they're waiting for the manga to keep going, so they start doing these crappy filler episodes until the manga catches up with them, and they can start doing those episodes again. But it's a totally different thing because that's so normal in that culture that people just kind of accept it. And I never hear anybody comparing those shows to the original comics. So this is going to be a different sort of phenomenon that happens when the show continues past where the books are. And I'm not sure how those book readers are going to react because they can't fall back on that. Well, that didn't happen in the book. So I wonder if they're going to start reading the book when it finally comes out later on and go, well, that's not how it happened in the show. But of course, nobody's going to be listening to them because everybody reads at their own pace. So not everybody's going to be on the same page. See what I did there? When they're talking about what's happening in the books.
To kind of turn over a new page or a new leaf. No, I was pushing one to do a pun like you.
No.
I think this is interesting that because there has been, and this is a fun divide between the book readers and the non-book readers. And the closest I've ever seen anyone being less than kind is I saw someone on one of my Facebook pages say that someone shouldn't complain about spoilers on Game of Thrones because the book has been out there for years. And but most people have seemed to be very kind to non-book readers that they want them to experience the show. I guess Harry Potter is a good, kind of, similar situation, but I think this is new territory. And what I'm curious is how much is the show going to influence the books? We've already seen, and I think they're two different animals, and I know Lou and Shannon have both shared there's been things that the show has done in a lot of ways a better job than the book with some of the characters and taking people and combining storylines. So you wonder, is this going to either consciously or unconsciously George R. Martin to think about what I should do? And will he think of maybe the actors that are playing the characters? Because, I don't believe I don't think he has the complete ending in his mind yet. I'm not sure. So, I've made the decision, and this is kind of interesting based on one of our other questions. I'm not going to read the books till the series is over, and then I'll enjoy them because I want to have them independent of each other. But great comment.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting because it's always interesting to see when the shoe is on the other foot how the other party behaves, and is one party going to be above taking I told you so kind of attitudes with the other party? I'm not sure. I've already sort of been through it this season because I only read up to book 4, which I had a lot of trouble getting through, and I really wasn't interested in reading the next one. So I've kind of already gone through it. And for me, it ended up being probably the best season of Game of Thrones for me because I didn't know everything that was going to happen. And the things that I wasn't crazy about in the book 4 were really condensed. So I think that the book readers are going to go through an interesting experience, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens to them when they actually get the next book and compare it against the show. Which one are they going to like better? Because now the show has brought them ahead of the book, where it was always the other way around. So this is maybe a once in a pop culture phenomenon that is going to be very interesting to see down in the next couple of years how this plays out with TV versus book readers.
Yeah, it's fascinating for me as somebody who is current on the books, seeing things happen. Like I just raved about the Dany and Tyrion meeting, which has not happened on the page yet. And there were several other moments that we've discussed on the podcast like that. So I enjoy it. I like being surprised. I can't stop myself from reading. If The Winds of Winter comes out before season 6, then I will drop everything and read that front to back when it comes out. It'll be interesting to see. One of the things that George R.R. Martin has said, sometimes he likes their choices, sometimes he doesn't. He's complained about a butterfly effect, because in the novels, when the Khalasar surrounds Dany, for example, the guy that's leading the pack is somebody who died on the show, he was like Khal Drogo's second or third in command. I can't remember his name, but he was Joko, maybe. He was one of the ones that was killed when he challenged Khal Drogo back in season 1. So, those kind of things ripple throughout it. And then he said, man, I love Natalia Tenya's performance as Osha, and I wish I had configured the character on the page to be more like her performance. So it does give and take both ways. As far as parallels go, a couple of things came to mind. One is there's a history of Terminator movies, and we had the 3 movies, and then there was a 4th movie coming out, Terminator Salvation, and now a 5th one, coincidentally starring Khaleesi, Emilia Clarke, as another version of Sarah Connor, who was portrayed on Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles by Cersei, Lena Headey. And at the time that 4th movie was coming out, the TV show was on, and there were all kinds of interesting parallel, is it a parallel universe? Is the plot going to play into it? And that was kind of going on. And then the other transmedia example I could think of is what's happening with Marvel, because Marvel, not only do you have comic book continuity and canon, which itself gets rebooted or recontextualized or reconceived, in the Ultimates line or for a new generation or as things go on. But you also have Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is supposed to be directly in the MCU, the movie continuity. And so you have things like, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had to spin its wheels just a little bit until The Winter Soldier came out and we found out what we did about S.H.I.E.L.D. as an organization, which had a huge impact on the very title of the show and the conception of that show. So that's probably the closest parallel I could think of to what's going on between the book and the TV show for Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I don't really think of those as the same because that's not an ending story. Like the Marvel Comics is not, it's not a story that's going to ever have an end to it.
Right, yeah, it's not a perfect analogy.
It's a universe. And you're just dipping into different parts of the universe. So to me, it's not. It's very different because this is a story that, according to George Martin, has an ending that he's planning. He just hasn't gotten to it yet, and he's shared some of the key pieces with the showrunners. But then they have license to fill in however they want and do things with the characters, and. So I don't. It's not a. I don't see that one fitting all that well. I do see the effect though of how a TV show and its popularity can impact the other flavors and the potential that maybe. And I don't know about Bronn in the books. I don't know where he is. I've only listened to book 1 on CD, and I'm. Like Jesse, I'm not planning to continue until the show ends, but, I'm just using him as an example. Maybe they decide that he's going to sing somewhere along the lines in the books, or, open a nightclub eventually. I would be skeptical, though, if George Martin would be too influenced by what they do, because it seems like he's sort of the prime source. So he might say, oh, that's interesting, but I don't know how much it will actually influence him personally. One of the things, the other show, though, that makes me, that came to mind when we were talking about this was The Walking Dead, because The Walking Dead is a story maybe without an end. I don't really know. I stopped reading the comics a very long time ago, but there's certainly years of material ahead for the show. But at some point, the show could start influencing the comics because of the involvement of the showrunner, the creator of the comics in the show itself too, much more directly than George Martin is. So that's the only other one I could think of immediately where you'd see sort of the bouncing back and forth possibly.
What about some of the YA stuff like Twilight or Divergent or Hunger Games? Some of those were pretty close in terms of option for movies and the book series. I don't follow them that closely, but maybe somebody else knows better.
Well, I just know from the Hunger Games, they've vastly improved the books in the movie, but I don't know enough about the timing. But I want to come back to the prophecy part also. Because in season 5, you had the prophecy, but you also had the flashback, both used for Cersei. And I want to ask, how effective did people think that was? Were you disappointed that we didn't get a flashback later, maybe where we either saw Cersei as a child, maybe talking to Tywin about, in a circuitous way, talking about this prophecy or talking to anybody about it later on, or even showing her sort of vaguely looking at a crown and looking like she's reflecting on her prophecy, or anything more direct? Because to me, it felt like we would see that Cersei child again, and we didn't.
No, I wasn't really looking for a follow-up on the prophecy, because I think in the end, what that prophecy really did for her was influence the way she sort of acted the whole time up to this point. She didn't trust Marjorie because she thought she was probably the younger, more beautiful one that was coming to take everything away from her. And she was always very fiercely protective of all her children because she was told that they were going to die. And that's really just, that is totally influenced by that prophecy. If she hadn't heard that as a child, she may have been a different person. And now we know why she acts the way she does.
So just to be cantankerous, we are really paying attention to the prophecy because the show just showed us that. But you could make the argument that that was not a significant moment in Cersei's life, and the reason she's not brought it up is she's not really dwelt on it a lot, and because all her reasoning for the way she is totally about protecting her children. Tyrion even said, "You love your children. That's one of your best features, along with your cheekbones." And so this could be just something we're significant because as the show watchers or book readers, but the character, it may not be anything significant to her at all. And she's just acting this way because, she doesn't like Marjorie and she wants to be the number one person in her children's lives. I'm not saying I necessarily agree with that, but I think it certainly is a theory that could work.
So could we say that this was a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with both of what Christine and Jesse said. I think that for me, the thing that I remember the most about that sequence was that prophecy basically made Cersei into what she was, and why she was so defensive about her family and everything. And very ruthless in cutting down her opponents, because as far as she was concerned, any one of them could have been part of the prophecy. So in a lot of ways, this prophecy cast the die for her. And the other point I would make about that prophecy was because it happened at the beginning of the season. And again, I think it was a stylistic choice just to throw us for a loop, because we were all expecting the show to go to a certain place, and they gave us this instead. Because this was a really dense season and so many things happened, as you sort of intuited at the beginning, Wendy, I think they needed to revisit that sequence in some way partway through the season, just to reemphasize the prophecy for us, because so much stuff happened between that first scene and her moment of incarceration, that a lot of the stuff in that prophecy was buried under tons of other dense happenings that were going on during the whole season.
As a scene, I mean, it wasn't really that much real estate in the 10 hours or so, give or take, that we got. So it really worked for me. It worked for me on a thematic level. I thought it was well cast, well shot. It was a nice touch of character for Cersei, whose character was really on a journey this year. So I liked it and thought it was well executed.
Lou, I think you raised a good point, and Jesse too, about our expectations of prophecy. And one of the questions I had while I was listening to you guys was wondering, is this the only time Cersei's ever had a prophecy given to her or consulted a prophet for anything? Because I don't think she ever has. So, Jesse, I think your point about, she was given a prophecy, but she might not have really recognized that she was acting out on it, even though we all agree she was. It's sort of like asking people if they're superstitious, and that's what they say that they're not, or they disregard it, but they actually behave as if they are superstitious about things.
Yeah.
So I want to go even bigger picture, though, in terms of the method of using this, the flashback to foreshadow things that are coming with Cersei, and possibly as red herrings for things that we might hope would happen, but maybe George R.R. Martin is going to pull the rug out and sort of circumvent tradition. We talked a lot over the season about Chekhov's guns that were lying around, Dornish tattoos or Dornish moles and grayscale and stuff. How did those techniques work for you guys? Do you want as much foreshadowing as we saw this season? Did it work for you? Sorry,
I certainly enjoyed it. And we definitely picked up on it eventually. They're talking about this. Oh, they're talking about this. And there were a couple of things that got really put into the season quite obviously that they haven't followed up on yet. I mean, Grey Worm and Missandei's sort of love interest there doesn't really seem to have come to anything yet. I would like to see that wrapped up. And then, of course, there was that one episode that was just chock full of little background story on Rhaegar and what he did with Lyanna. And I know that made everybody go nuts when the R+L=J front. And then, of course, the season ended the way it did. I really hope that we get to see a little bow tied on that storyline, to make everybody happy. Of course, I really think that Jon would have to come back for that. But yeah, those little bits of foreshadowing, the ones we knew when they were happening and the ones that we didn't, they were so nice when they got wrapped up in a bow at the end, that I'd like to keep seeing that. It's a wonderful storytelling technique.
Yeah, I didn't think it was as overt as some have been. Some shows, this is important. And, you kind of like, okay, I get it. It's important. And this one, I think it was a little bit better. In fact, I did not understand till it happened why the Dorne birthmark was going to play a significant point. And so, yeah, I'm okay with it. And I think it gives a richness to the story that, because there's enough in there that they catch you unaware and they give you maybe what you want, but twist it a little. So, yeah, I think this is, I think this show does foreshadowing and setting expectations really well. So, yeah, I'm happy with it.
I guess I'm going to have to be the grumpy person this time, because outside of the Cersei foreshadowing, I think this show just has so many characters and is just so broad that foreshadowing for this, at least in the TV format, doesn't work that well, because it's really hard to remember if there is any foreshadowing who it's pertaining to. And case in point is, Jon Snow. There's a lot more foreshadowing that the show, especially for non-book readers, to me, had to do to build up the link that everybody's hoping for this resurrection of Jon Snow, because he's the prophesized leader or whatever. And I didn't get that at all from this season. I thought that was at best subtly done and more of a throwaway thing than any sort of really well mapped out foreshadowing. And again, because there's so many characters, but they're all supposed to be drawn towards this common goal of the Iron Throne. If a prophecy is going to be that important, and I don't know how you would do with the TV show, because it would not be organic at all, it has to be something that cuts across all the story threads. And that's not happening to my mind at all in this series. So I thought the Cersei thing was well done, but outside of that, it's pretty fragmented, and because the story's so dense, I haven't really seen us like, if you ask a non-book person that they know that about this prophecy of this returning hero, I don't think most of them are even going to be aware that exists.
I would disagree a little bit about that, Lou. The nuances of it, yeah, may be lost, but Melisandre has talked about Stannis being this returning hero many times, and in all the seasons since those characters have been introduced. So the fact that she may be setting her sights on Jon instead of Stannis as the prophesized leader to return and fight back the White Walkers or the evil from the invading North. I think they have laid the pipe for that. And, and it's difficult because there are different levels of engagement. You have your book readers, you have the people that watch the show and watch each episode 3-4 times like we do, and then actually do a podcast about it. And then you have the folks that are just like, oh, hey, here's a cool show on Sunday. And you have to, as creators and writers, you have to thread a line of how much is tipping our hand too much and how much is really laying the foreshadowing and symbols and signs and portents on too thick. And I kind of fall that I think they've done a pretty good job of all the Chekhovs paying off something that they've introduced. They've only got a limited amount of real estate, so they can't do, super broad catch up and beat us over the head with it. But yet the people that are really involved with the material can't think like, oh my God, we knew that already. Would you let up? So for me, it works. And I think they've done a really good job of not overwhelming us with information, but just providing enough that there are good payoffs to it.
Well, I think that certainly they did a decent job with Ollie and what he was going to do. And even Mirren Trant coming into Arya's sights to get her payback. And I think the grayscale one, they sprinkled that in a lot of places. So we knew somebody was going to get grayscale. Not necessarily it was going to be Jorah, but we knew it was going to be relevant somehow, and probably relevant bigger picture if he's patient zero running around wiping his hand all over people in search of Dany. But I think Lou does raise an interesting point about Jon Snow in particular, because to me, we have a sense that he's important, but I've never heard anybody tell the story in the show about the prince that's promised or anything. You know, we have Melisandre talking about the power of king's blood, and we have suspicions that somehow Jon Snow might be connected to somebody with king's blood. And, you know, we know that it worked to some extent. They interpreted that it worked when they used Gendry's blood as Robert's bastard. So they've laid the seeds. But to me, the thing about Jon Snow being resurrected in the show that has planted that idea is because Melisandre had those laser eyes on him and wanted to make a smoke baby. And also she returned, you know, just at the right time to Castle Black. So to me, it's more those things that have planted the seeds versus a lot of the things that the books have planted.
I think if we go back to the episode we did after last season, where we all talked about who was Jon Snow's mother, Wendy, you and I both came to the conclusion that it was Lyanna, and you just admitted that you had only listened to the first book on audio, and all of my speculation had come from watching the show. Everything came from like little tidbits I had picked up on, and the only reason it finally came to my mind was rewatching the very first season, like the second episode, and it was one thing that Ned said to him, and it was, you may not have my name, but you have my blood. And he didn't say you're my son. So I think if someone decides to get interested enough in the show to start wondering about these things, to go, wait a minute, why don't we know who Jon Snow's mother is? And they decide to look into it and just rewatch the episodes, I think it is that something that they can pick up on, but it's not in your face if you're just a casual viewer. So it's there for people who want to dig more.
Yeah, I'm good. What you guys said.
Yeah. Again, if it's something that important, I don't think it should be something that you have to dig for. And I can't agree with what Shannon. I think Shannon's got the book perspective, and I just don't see that connection being put out in the show very clearly at all. So I can't go along with the mass opinion on that at all.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't think there's an overwhelming agreement that it's well done consistently in the show. I think it does, miles vary because as Christine pointed out, there's a lot of stuff in season 1 that I remember not really listening to. And when I rewatched season 1, I was like, wow, they name drop all these people and they're planting all this stuff. But it's like, honestly, would you just get on the horse and ride somewhere? Because, I don't really want to watch you and Robert have a picnic or whatever you're doing. And in the beginning of the show, first of all, I was trying to figure out what everyone's name was and where's the story coalescing into in terms of literally the locations and who was who. So they were probably planting a lot of that stuff in season 1 that I would probably need to rewatch now.
Well, they still have, the chance. I think we're all pretty sure that they're going to actually cover this at some point during the show, but they still have the chance to really make that part of the storyline all by itself work. And people who have only been casually viewing it up till now should be able to understand it with what they finally throw at us when they get to that point. But for people who have been paying attention and digging for those little nuggets, it'll just really, it'll be a nice savory meal when we get to it.
Yeah, I did want to mention, and I think because of Wendy bringing it up, I remember being very confused when why naming Jon Snow's mother was the test for these people. I don't get that. And it wasn't till, actually a couple of seasons in and, hearing all these different theories and then our discussion made me go, oh, this is important. And maybe if I had read the books, I would have seen that importance. And I do think that is the beauty of this book and series, right, is that with rewatching, you see a lot of depth. And the closest I think I remember is, Babylon 5, that when you rewatch the show, even like the first season, which a lot of people think is, mixed at best, there's a lot of layers that are being built, similar to Farscape, right? That they build a lot of stuff that as you watch the show again, you understand that context and things.
Yeah, and I think, though, to Lou's point, you shouldn't have to rewatch the show to know what's going on either, though. And I don't think we're in that scenario. But I do agree. I think miles vary on how effectively it always works. And some of that could be just the time between when whatever they're planting actually comes to fruition, how present of mind it is for people. It's funny, though, when you were mentioning other shows that are on rewatching, you see the continuity, and tuning into Sci-Fi, we've been rewatching Continuum, and that's a show that when you rewatch it is amazing for the continuity that they have.
I think it was kind of like I said earlier. It's a almost impossible challenge for the showrunners to appease people with various levels of interest and attention spans and history and experience with the material in all its formats. So I don't envy what they have to do at all. And for me, it's really, really worked. And as you said, on rewatch, you're finding more of the tapestry being woven before you even realized it. And then, like Lou said, it may not work for him, and he may want more, or other people may want less. So, I think the fact that we're still on board with the show 5 seasons and its ratings are bigger than ever is testament to the fact that, for the most part, it's working, and we can all quibble as to the degree.
Yeah, and the other point I would make about this whole Jon Snow resurrection thing is, I really don't think the show needs it. There's enough characters still in the wings to take his spot without the show missing a beat. And they've already resurrected one character. Was it back in season 3? And what's he been doing since then? Like, if being resurrected from the dead is such a big deal, why is that guy just kind of still wandering in the wilderness? So, and any other story that we've seen about resurrecting people from the dead, there's always been, it's like a monkey's paw scenario, or they never come back the way they were, and they're usually damaged in some way. If anybody's been watching Penny Dreadful, we're seeing that same scenario play out again. So the whole Jon Snow being resurrected is just not a storyline that interests me, and his lineage to me is also something that I think is just like I don't know, it's kind of like a get out of jail free card. Let the snow lie in the snow.
So I have a question about that, though. Not about resurrection, but I have a question about more flashbacks and more prophecy. Do we expect to see more, or about the same amount as we've seen so far in season 6?
I don't think we're going to get any more flashbacks. I think that's, well, okay. No, let me rethink that.
Actually, we know one of them's coming already from the casting. Spoilers.
Shh. Spoilers.
Well, we're not going to say the spoilers.
Well, I think there will be a few flashbacks. Probably. This is my hope that they will. Despite Lou's disinterest in the story, they will cover John's heritage, and that obviously it needs a little more expanding on. For the people who haven't been digging for the nuggets, they're going to have to tell it in a big package, and maybe if people want to go back and find those nuggets, they'll be happy to find them there. But it really does, for good storytelling, it all needs to be explained simply when it comes out, and flashbacks are most likely the easiest way to tell that story. And sometimes people complain that they're a crutch, a bad writing technique to have to go to a flashback, but every once in a while it works, and I think these showrunners have been doing a good job with stuff like that. And we've had their first flashback, and everybody seemed to love it. So I think that will work. So we'll probably get some flashbacks involving something like that. But I hope they use flashbacks sparingly and only in cases like that. Foreshadowing, honestly, they've been doing foreshadowing a lot already, and I think it's part of the writing technique already. So we're just gonna keep seeing that.
Yeah, I think I meant prophecy. I don't know if I said foreshadowing, but I meant prophecy.
I hope we don't get any more prophecy, because they've been, like, I know there's been a lot more of it in the books, and they've really trimmed back on that in the show. Like when Daenerys was walking through the House of the Undying, that was a lot longer of a scene with a lot more visions. Yep. So, and we only got like, what, 2 little bits of that in the show. So I don't think they want to do the prophecies. Personally, I'm not a big fan of them, because it always seems to work out the same in any setting. Somebody misinterprets them and tries to prevent them from happening, and therefore causes them to happen. And it's just this vicious cycle. I've seen it enough. And honestly, I think we already saw it with Cersei. She brought about everything that happened to her this season, and probably a bunch of stuff before that. So I hope that's the only prophecy they bring into the show.
Yeah, I don't think they've gone to the well too often with prophecy, and I don't think they'll continue. The other thing, as I was listening to everyone talk about this, the reason Jon Snow's parents are a big deal is all of the discussion outside the show. The show itself has had a few things thrown in there, but it has not put this as this major mystery. And so I don't think this is going to happen. But if the showrunners decided, yep, Jon Snow's dead, that's it, and we're just going to move on, it isn't going to be like this. The readers and watchers may go, hey, wait a minute, what about? But there's no one else, as we talked about, no one else would care about his lineages because he's dead, and no one has that, burning desire to solve this mystery because they don't know it's a mystery. Just so, Lou, you may be right. He may be cold as ice and stay cold as ice. Hence he is the snow. Yes. Yeah, but as far as I think they're going to keep foreshadowing, but I think they're going to have very little prophecies because I think it's too a catch-all. And there's always a sacred text, right? There, yeah. That's for you, Lou.
Thank you. Yeah. Will they do it? Like, if they do it, they see now that to me they've kind of painted themselves in the corner, because if they do prophecies and it's anything related to Jon Snow, they're gonna be in that slippery slope between prophecies and retcons in order to make his backstory fit into the show when that should have already been done before. Like, I think the best example of a franchise that did that well would be the Dune series, where all the prophecies were told before the events happened. If you tell the prophecies after events happened, it's always kind of like I think there's a little bit of tap dancing going on here. But outside of Jon Snow, I'm wondering if there's going to be any prophecies with Dany, because now she's reunited with the Dothraki. That would be interesting to see. And of course, we still have the other Starks with their powers and whatnot. That there could be prophecies that they might be revealed to them from the other faction out there. They're not
the Children of the Forest.
The Children of the Forest. So that if I had to put my money on any group having prophecy type experiences, it would be with those characters.
Yeah, I think they've been pretty sparing about it. And as Christine mentioned, there was a whole lot of I don't know that it's necessarily foreshadowing, but visions of the future that came to Daenerys in the House of the Undying, and they really backed off of those, except for something a little symbolic. And in recent days, like in the last couple of weeks, they've even said, "Hey, we love Jason Momoa," and that was mostly just a chance to get him back to come play with us again. So, there are things there though, because like the color of the roses or the flowers in the wall in that. And, there's lots of little things that if you're a hardcore book reader and you feel like they're omitting something, they do throw you a bone. So they can do it subtly without beating us over the head with it. And going back to the Jon Snow thing, like if he does turn out to be the prince that was promised and fulfill the role that Melisandre thought Stannis would, they have laid the ground with that without having to go back to another prophecy. So I don't necessarily consider it a retcon as much as falling into that trope of prophecy interpretation, and then they've used them sparingly. And just like voiceover, voiceover is a crutch they always tell you never to use, but when it's done well, it can really add to the story, like Fight Club or that new USA show, Mr. Robot, I thought made a really good use of voiceovers.
Yeah.
So if you know what you're doing, you can subvert the trope and actually turn it into a positive. But I think you mentioned at the beginning we do know there is going to be some type of flashback, and I expect it'll play on what Lou said with Bran being tied into the Wi-Fi network of the trees, and being able to look into the past via the Children of the Forest and all those accumulated memories that he now has access to via that. So if they do one next year, that's kind of how I expect it'll be executed.
Well, I have a couple questions for the book readers who've read past book one. In the books, are there storylines and I'll say balls presented that get dropped and disappeared routinely? Basically things that are introduced that just never seem to pan out to anything. Because that was basically where Jon Snow's story would be if he stays dead.
Yeah, just like if Reek and Sansa stay dead too. That would be kind of like a dead storyline too.
It's nothing as major as if Jon Snow. When we talked about our predictions, there's just been so much within the text and extra text and comments by everybody involved that led me to believe that that's not just going to be a surprise and a narrative dead end. But in the books, there have been tangents and things that it's difficult to say if they've been dropped and ignored because he's not done yet. There are things lingering, but nothing major along those lines. I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say there are probably several things that would be a 3 or a 4 that have not been answered, and you wonder if he has the bandwidth to get to them. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, it's mostly anybody that's been resurrected in the books. They really haven't gone anywhere too far beyond being revealed to being resurrected. So. It's amazingly, kudos to George R. R. Martin. Most of the storylines that he brings in pay off, which is why I'm sure I'm going to be totally wrong about or have my desires not met about what's going to happen with Jon Snow.
And part of that is the limits of the point of view structure of the novels too, because something could be happening elsewhere in Essos or Westeros, and we just may not have been exposed to it yet because a point of view character who would know hasn't been represented with their own chapters.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes me wonder a little bit, this whole idea that we have unreliable sources of information, and we don't actually, we're not omniscient to the world. So there could be stuff going on with the Greyjoys, or Lou asked earlier what happened to Beric Dondarrion. Maybe the Brothers Without Banners are getting ready to revolt someplace or something. But we do see a little more. But we have no insight into that in the show, or even through the books. And I'm curious. I don't feel that when I watch the show as much as it seems more apparent in the books. This idea of unreliable narrators.
Oops, I'm sorry, Wendy. I was just going to say we do get a little bit more with the Brotherhood Without Banners and Beric Dondarrion and the things going on in the Riverlands and that whole area. Jaime winds up going there to put down some of the rebellion versus going to Dorne. Brienne takes an active role, a very active role in the books in that area, and we're exposed to a little bit more of their stories. So they have taken some significant departures from the text on the show. And, does that say that we'll get to it eventually, or does it say that those were narrative digressions that aren't as important to the big picture story? We still don't know yet.
Yeah, it's what makes this an interesting an interesting way of storytelling as your source material.
Yeah. Because there has to be some overlap going forward. So like they've done some divergence, especially like with Sansa and Reek. I'm really curious to see how that's going to be brought back up to line up with whatever George Martin's going to write about them in the subsequent books. So stuff like that is going to be very interesting to see for sure.
Indeed. So I think that's a good place for us to pause the small council for now. We will take up some other listener feedback in an upcoming installment. But before we go, I want to thank everyone for listening and thank all of our small council for sharing their thoughts around the table. We will see you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
We love to get your feedback. Call us at 206-202-4182 or leave us a Skype voicemail to our Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV name. We have many ways to keep the discussion going on our blog. Drop by tuningintoscifitv.com and leave a comment. On the blog, you'll also find links to the forum discussions and other links to follow our Twitter and RSS feeds and find our Facebook account.
Listen to Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV on Stitcher Radio On Demand. Download the free app today at Stitcher.com. You've been listening to a Game of Thrones special from Tuning Into Sci-Fi TV, Episode 48, recorded June 29th, 2015.